Welcome, everybody. My name is Peter van Grinsven, and I'm moderating this webinar on farmer selection and recruitment. I won't do that alone. There will be a few speakers, but let me first introduce you to this webinar. Today, we'll discuss how organizations can work more efficiently with smallholder farmers for increased yield and income, and for general sustainability of a farm and the sector. Jay, can you go to the first slide? Yeah, next slide. Okay. So what we want to talk about, what we want to focus on is, in this case, the case of corn, of rice, of cocoa, which are smallholder-oriented crops. And sometimes crops are smallholder-oriented due to land ownership, historical development of the industry, the nature of the commodity. And often these are non-perishable high-value crops in remote areas. It's important that we keep in mind that companies need producers of raw materials and farmers need buyers for their crops. Companies and farmers should work together for mutual benefit, and because basically it would take many years to reorient smallholder crops to a plantation setting, if possible at all. And of course, smallholders would lose out if that would happen. A long-term mutually beneficial relationship makes sense for both companies and for farmers. Farmers would benefit from working with companies to have access to markets, to have price and transparency in the system, to get training, coaching, access to inputs, and maybe even financing. But companies benefit too from a long-term relationship through loyalty from farmers, which gives them secured supply. It gives them a volume capture and a more efficient pipeline, consistent quality. And of course, they then know how their products are produced. They can claim to their customers that their products come from a verified sustainable source. And it's also important that we understand that we should work together for the right reasons. Altruism is good, but altruism doesn't necessarily last long. We need to make sure that we work together for something that has a mutual benefit. And one of the first things we need to do for that is to make sure that we know whom we are working with. And that leads us to this webinar, which is about selection and recruiting of farmers. But before you go to selection, you have to start working on segmentation for farmers. And to do and that we do that to make sure that we offer the right services to the right farmers who are interested in a certain program or project. Next slide, Jay. Jay, can I have next slide? Okay. So many companies have made commitments in the past for sustainability. It's now been in some crops for 20 years that companies have invested. And it's really been working with farmers to initially to work on trade volume, on higher productivity. Then we also became more interested in the social environment, child labor, things like that. And now, of course, environmental protection is very high on the list of things we want to accomplish together with smallholder farmers. So many companies have invested, they have put programs in place or collaborated as an industry on certain programs. And it's been, and I've been part of companies doing that. There's been really significant efforts and significant amounts of money spent on these programs. But I think it's fair to say that those programs haven't been as successful as could be. But what we now have, we have three companies here that, or three organizations that are going to talk about how they're approaching segmentation, selecting, and recruitment. These organizations are very different in their targets, in the rationale for engaging on segmentation, selection, and recruitment. We'll have a representative of Babangona working on seasonal and annual crops. We'll introduce that later. We'll have somebody from Touton working on cocoa, which is very different because this is a perennial crop that takes many years to mature and start bearing fruits and has a life cycle of 20 years. And we have somebody from IDH, a development organization, working on many crops with a range of different partners. All three organizations are working on different approaches for segmentation, selection, and recruitment. Before we dive into their presentations, I quickly want to share with you that there are, when you talk about segmentation, there are basically two sets of data that are important. There are structural data. That's data we're all used to. It's about how big the farm is, how old the farmer is, what the production is, how the competences the farmer has been trained for. These data are pretty easy to collect, basically. They are often highly quantifiable. You can put numbers to them. But the use of those data hasn't really led to a lot of success in the programs with farmers. If I would look at the coffee and cocoa sector, which I know best, then maybe 15 or 20% of farmers have actually adopted the practices over a period of time, and even fewer are persevering in those practices. And even a lesser amount of farmers are implementing all the things they've learned. So they've chosen some of the interventions, not the whole package, which unfortunately means that it's not going to be as impactful as could be. The other set of data that we are not so used to are attitudinal data. It's more about qualifying attitudes. It's about motivation, aspiration, energy that farmers have to invest in their farms, to work on their farms, to change their farms. This information is a lot harder to collect. It's hard to quantify because it's very qualitative in nature. But there are some tools that have been developed for market segmentation, and that's been adopted for agriculture. And those tools are now becoming more and more available and are used more often in the agricultural sector. We'll have a look at those. And the word you need to get used to is persona, basically a way of quantifying this qualitative information is by putting farmers in groups with similar traits, and those are called persona. Next slide, Jay. Okay, so what we want to do in this webinar is to learn how we can work together with farmers more efficiently, more effectively, and how can we use these segmentation tools to select the right farmers for the right programs, and at the same time to tailor-make the programs we have to the persona, to the groups of farmers that we are targeting to work with. We are early in this arena, but it's happening now. Another purpose of this webinar is to share the learnings we have so far. What have companies done up until this moment? And do they have a need to even improve the work they've done now on segmentation? And then how do we efficiently and reliably classify a farmer for persona? It's one thing to know that farmers could be of a certain could fit in a certain group, would have certain traits, but how do you recognize that? How do you, when you meet a farmer, judge whether he is an outgoing person, whether he is a conservative thinker, whether he's a hard worker, or whether he's interested in farming? So we need to learn how to reliably classify farmers to put them to the right persona. And we would then want to talk a bit about what is next. What can companies do for better segmentation and farmer engagement? What is IDH developing with regards to segmentation, selecting, and recruiting? And can we bring all this together in a system so that all of us can become more efficient in the selection of the farmers and the segmentation in the right persona? One more slide, Jay. Okay. Let me now go to the introduction of the various speakers. I will just introduce myself very briefly. I'm Peter van Grinsven. I'm working with IDH, and I have my background in tropical tree crops, mainly cocoa, for 34 years with a large multinational, in my case, Mars. And I was a sustainability director in that company. We will have, in the order of speakers, we'll have Annelle Evano. She works for Touton. Annelle has worked for Touton since 2015, and she leads the group's sustainable sourcing strategy in Uganda, and that's where she lives. Touton is a leading agricultural commodities trading and processing company. It's been around for more than 150 years, 170 years, established in 1848. And the company sources cocoa, coffee, vanilla, spices, and other ingredients, and they're working globally. Annette spent 4 years in Ghana up until recently, and she was involved in the establishment of the Touton's Rural Services Centers, which is an innovative service delivery model to work with cocoa smallholder farmers. Uh, Annelle has moved to Uganda in 2020, very recently, and she's now responsible for the implementation of a direct sourcing structure with coffee producers and the development of services and partnerships to improve profitability, resilience, and livelihoods of coffee growing households. So she brings a background of cocoa, and now she has insights in coffee as well, which would make our discussion even more interesting. Then we have from a company, Babangona, we have Ubong Inyang. He is from Nigeria, living in Lagos. He is an experienced corporate finance and agribusiness professional, and he has over 9 years experience in the private sector. He currently leads the development of strategic relationships and partnerships at Babangona, and that is a high impact social enterprise that supports over 40,000 smallholder farmers in Nigeria. And they provide them with access to finance, training, harvest, and post-harvest support. Ubong's work revolves around the designing and leading the execution of innovative and large-scale strategic projects designed to deepen market penetration and expand the impact of Babangona's work with smallholder farmers. Ubong holds a master's in business administration and international business law from the business school Madrid, Spain. And as the last speaker, we have from IDH the Institute Duurzame Handel, Sustainable Trade Initiative. We have Jay Akiredi. Jay has been leading the smallholder inclusion and technology themes at IDH since the end of 2018. Jay is an expert in developing inclusive business models and leading agribusinesses. He brings innovations across industries and geographies and pulls together different pieces for a bigger picture, and that comes natural to him. Before joining IDH as a senior manager, learning and innovation, Jay worked with the World Food Program in Zambia, where he created the e-commerce app to link smallholder farmers with markets. Jay has done extensive work in developing countries to create farmer-inclusive businesses for the last 7 years. So we have 3 speakers who all have significant backgrounds in the commodities that they're now working on. That's cocoa and coffee. That is rice and maize. And Jay has worked on a range of commodities that IDH is involved in with the partners, with businesses they're supporting. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to Annelle to tell us how Touton is managing their activities with smallholder farmers in Ghana. Annelle, over to you.
Thank you very much, Peter, and thank you for the introduction. I'm glad to be here representing Touton and to share with you some thoughts about our experience in our cocoa supply chain around farmer segmentation, selection, and coaching. I hope it can pave the way for some interesting discussions a little bit later on during the Q&A session around how to engage and maintain farmers' engagements in our sustainable supply chain programs. Next slide, Jay, please. Thank you. So as a way of quick introduction, although Peter has mentioned a few points already, so Touton is a French agricultural commodities trading company, which was created more than 170 years ago. We are present in 12 countries worldwide, and we have a strong presence in the producing countries of the communities that we trade, which are cocoa mainly, cocoa products, coffee, green coffee beans, vanilla, spices, and ingredients. In our direct supply chains, we work with over 100,000 smallholder farmers, and we have been implementing service delivery models such as the Rural Service Center approach that we have been implementing in Ghana since 2014. So over 100,000 smallholder producers represent a diversity of profiles a diversity of capacities, of ambitions and expectations that farmers, smallholder producers more specifically, may have about their farming activity. And in that specific context that we're going to talk about cocoa farming activity. So this is the rationale behind the collaboration that we have had with Mars, the Grameen Foundation and Rainforest Alliance since 2016, to develop and pilot an individual and tailor-made diagnostic and coaching methodology, the Farm Development Plan. So the Farm Development Plan is one of the services that is embedded in our Rural Service Center model in Ghana. So my intervention today will be mainly focused on cocoa in the context of West Africa and more specifically Ghana, but I'm happy to also discuss a little bit more about coffee later on. So it's in the context of the Farm Development Plan that we have been using farm selection and segmentation approaches, and this is what I'm going to detail in the next few minutes. Next slide, please. Thank you. So what is the rationale and the objective of the Farm Development Plan? So the approach acknowledges that we cannot provide efficient extension support to our partner smallholder producers by implementing a one-size-fits-all extension model or agronomic recommendations or financial recommendations, because of course households are very different in their capacity, whether if we're talking about labor, financial resources, etc., but also in terms of ambitions and expectation from their farming activity. So the Farm Development Plan that we have been piloting since 2016 comprises of a digital tool, a mobile app that allows us to do a diagnostic of the farm, the level of adoption of the agronomic practices, and also a socioeconomic profiling of the household that allows us to map out expectations and ambitions, but also capacities. So these two aspects result in a 7 years activities and investment plan that is tailor-made for a specific household and that is based on what we know are the key leverages to improve productivity in the context of cocoa. Good agronomic practices, integrated soil fertility management, choice of planting material, etc. So the tool provides a roadmap, a guidelines, but it's still the responsibility and the effort of the household to implement this recommendation. Now, besides the digital tool and the plan per se, there are several layers of farmer and household engagement that is done by our field extension officers to understand the ambition in the beginning of the process, but also to monitor over time the level of adoption of the recommendation and to fine-tune the plan over time. So we believe that, the rationale behind this approach is to have a continuous engagement of the farmers to really drive the adoption of the recommendation. And hopefully the learnings from this pool of farmers that we support can have a positive spillover effect to the rest of the communities. And of course, for us as a company, it is a way to drive loyalty and to build a long-lasting relationship with the farmers. Now you can imagine that this approach is very time and human resources intensive. And that's the reason why we need to be able to carefully identify and select the farmers that have the highest potential to succeed in adopting this recommendation. Next slide, please. So we acknowledge that most smallholder cocoa farmers in Ghana, but not only, need to adopt certain practices to increase the productivity of their cocoa farm and therefore to improve their income and their financial resilience. We have a good idea of what these leverages are, but yeah, we struggle to drive this adoption at scale, as Peter mentioned in its introduction. We have done a good effort on identifying the needs, on developing a theory of change, and on developing product and services like the Farm Development Plan. and sometimes already done quite a good of efforts into identifying channels for delivery. But yet we don't really know how these services are really addressing the needs and the capacity of different typologies of farmers, households, or different type of segments. So segmentation in that specific context can help us in two ways. The first one is to anticipate to the obstacles and the leverages that can drive adoption for different typologies of farmers ahead of the implementation of the service. And the second way is to identify, or at least to try to identify, which are the typologies of farmers that are more likely to adopt the recommendation or the service or the product and be the promoters of these services, of this product. In other words, to be which are the early adopters. Next slide, please. So here is just a snapshot of the methodology that we have used in Ghana in the context of the Farm Development Plan. The ingredients for farmer selection and segmentation are most of the times quite the same, but it's more for what are the recipes that are being used. So one thing that to keep in mind, which is important, is that this approach was adapted to our context, to our supply chain. So we proceeded in two steps to select the farmers that will be onboarded to the FDP approach. The first step that we followed was a community selection. So in the community selection, the first step that we followed was to identify communities that were geographically accessible to our field extension officers because of the continuous monitoring and engagement that we needed to do with the farmers. So accessible means close enough to the offices where the field extension officers are, but also accessible throughout the year. The second aspect that we have, or the approach that we have followed, is the commercial relationship with the communities, and more specifically with the local agents that drive the commercial relationship. And because we acknowledge and we realize that maintaining farmers' engagements is very driven by the relationship we have with the local purchasing agent or purchasing clerks. So these two aspects were the first step of the selection. We then use different variables in the selection of farmers within these communities. The first aspect that we looked at is, of course, the farmers' participation in programs that were already ongoing in these communities, because farmers already had some level of extension, had received some level of extension, and we also had some level of data for this pool of farmers. Then, following a community sensitization, we let the farmers to self-register after having explained the outs and the bouts about the farm development plan. So the level of engagement that farmers needed to put in and level of effort. Finally, we left some margin and some flexibility to our field extension officers to make recommendations about farmers' households that they believe had the potential to be successful in implementing and adopting the FDP. So after all these steps of selection, eventually we ran a data analysis using both structural and functional or attitudinal variable. So these are the two aspects that Peter mentioned in his introduction. So the structural variables that we looked at were farm size, historic yields, size of the household, for example. Some of the functional variables we looked like is based on a pilot that TechnoServe implemented in Tanzania. So I'm going to look at it more into detail in the next slide, please, Jay. So the TechnoServe attitudinal segmentation that TechnoServe used in Tanzania in the Farmer First study is based on a set of 7 or 10 affirmation statements that the farmers that we suggest to we present to the farmers, and that they can answer to, from strongly disagree to agree. And based on these statements that are reflecting different types of behavior, of feelings towards farming, they are categorized into six different segments or persona. So initially, what we realized after running the segmentation to the pool of somehow already selected or narrowed down producers is that we resulted in about 75% of farmers that fell into two main segments, the contented dependents and the competent optimists. Now, we still had 23% of farmers who had gone through all the different steps of selection and did not necessarily fell into the segment that we would expect to be the early adopters. So those are the trapped, the traditionalists, and the frustrated escapists. Why do we still have this 23%? Well, maybe because these are farmers that were recommended by the field officers. Maybe they are farmers that demonstrated some proactivity in the self-enrollment phase, and that would have been left behind or left aside if we had only implemented a data-driven segmentation and selection. Now, so this is at the time of running the selection. Now, 2 years down the line, after implementing adoption observation monitoring, what is it that we observe? Well, we do see a positive correlation between the adoption level of the recommended practices and the segments that we would expect be the most likely to adopt these practices. So the segment that we would expect be the prioritized segment to look at in implementing the services, being the contented dependents and the competent optimists. There are certain activities that across the different segments are still very difficult to adopt for all the different segments. But we do see indeed that the contented dependents and the competent optimists do have a higher level of adoption across different activities. It is true that we didn't run the segmentation across a random pool of farmers. Therefore, we still have some pending questions. We see a correlation which demonstrates to a certain extent that, yes, we could have, if we do replicate the exercise and we target contented dependents and competent optimists, possibly we might have positive results. But it doesn't really tell us what are the inner drivers of adoptions or the obstacles that these different segments, all the different segments might face. And it doesn't necessarily also tell us how we go from these early adopters to scaling up the service to all the other segments. Last slide, please. Thank you. So what is the next, what is the way forward for us? And maybe there are still going to be some open pending questions, but that could be interesting to discuss with the participants about these questions in the Q&A session. So in the design of the service delivery, of a service delivery model, whichever service and whichever product or intervention we're talking about, most of the time we do a good job at defining the needs, but not necessarily the needs per the different segments. So the farmer segmentation is a good step in the design of the service to anticipate what could be the drivers or the obstacles to the adoption of the service. Now, in the implementation of the service, I think it's very important to keep an iterative approach that allow us to fine-tune the way we design, the way we implement the service, how we deliver it to the different segments, and how we fine-tune it to anticipate the scale-up phase. Because it is one thing to identify the early adopters for a specific service or product, But I think our ambition as an industry is to be able to, over time, increase the audience that we're targeting, and to make a change in or to impact on the level of adoption across different segments. One last thought, maybe from this experience, is that we don't really see or have lots of information from this experience on the real drivers of change. And when I say drivers of change, it's also people in the communities that can be the relay of the company to drive the adoption amongst the different peers. It can be geographic peers. It can also be peers by affinities, by characteristic, by platforms, by interest, etc. And I think it is something that would be very interesting to look into. There's a lot to learn from mainstream marketing, in a certain sense, on how really we drive adoption. So this is it for me. I hand you over to Peter, and I'm of course happy to answer all the questions in the Q&A session.
Okay, thank you, Annelle. This was a really engaging story. It's amazing all the steps you make before you even enter using data to do the segregation, to do the segmentation, sorry. So this is not an easy process, but clearly you've gone deep into it and you've identified that you're on the right track, but more needs to happen. And I'd be curious as to the questions that we're going to get from your session. Let us now move to the session on the company called Babangona. It's going to be Ubong Inyang, who's going to tell us about what their company has done and will be doing to work closely with farmers. Ubong, over to you. Hello?
Oh, sorry. Yes, so thank you, everyone. Thank you, Peter. It's a pleasure to be here. Over the course of my presentation, I'll be talking about Babangona, what it is that we do with smallholder farmers that we work with, how we go through selecting farmers that we work with, and how we segment or identify different categories where we place these farmers, and some of the challenges that we've experienced over time. Jay, could you go on to the next slide, please? So during the course of my presentation, I would go through these outlines, talking about farmer selection, testing and evaluation, the impact of data in farmer selection, training, and challenges that we currently face. Jay, can change on to the next slide. Right, so about Babangona, basically, in terms of our business model, Babangona is a for-profit social impact service provider. We work with smallholder farmers in rural communities in Nigeria, and basically the whole ambit of our service to these farmers is to provide them training on best agronomic practices, provide them with credits and inputs, and also to provide them with harvest and storage services, post-harvest, and more importantly, access to markets through helping them to sell their farm produce. Currently, we operate in maize and rice value chains, but our largest farmer numbers are still within the maize value chain. Over the years, we've been able to help our farmers achieve 2.5x in terms of their income in comparison to the national average. Our farmers also experienced 2x yields in comparison to other farmers within the national average. And in this year, we worked with over 40,000 smallholder farmers who collectively cultivated over 80,000 acres. And so in terms of recruiting farmers, we work with, we have a tiered system where, as you can see to the left of the screen there, Babangona sits on top as the service provider, and then we work with class of farmers that we call trust group entrepreneurs. So these trust group entrepreneurs are farmers that have been longest within Babangona's journey in providing services to farmers. And these are farmers that have stood out over time with a reputation for very high performance and also very high level of cooperation, particularly when you talk about loan repayment. And so this trust group entrepreneurs then recruits trust group leaders who are within the communities where they operate. Now, the trust group leader then recruits 2 or 3 other individuals, and that becomes a very basic unit of each of the farmer cooperative, which is the trust group. So there's a very strong referral component here within the system. And for us, we found this to be very successful because responsibilities are shared collectively within the trust group, and this has also helped in terms of repayment and defaults as you might have it. Jay, you can go on to the next slide, please. So in terms of farmer selection, like I mentioned, our recruitment process at Babangona is basically seeks to identify 2 things. Firstly, we seek to identify farmers with a very strong potential towards performance, and secondly, farmers with a very distinctive level of cooperativeness. We've been able to build this persona, as you may call it, over time based on our interaction with some of our most loyal, most trustworthy farmers that have been with us for the longest periods. So these are the key elements of what we as an organization look for when we are recruiting farmers into the group. And now, so the trust group entrepreneurs, these are long-standing members that have an excellent track record regarding performance and cooperativeness. And then these trust group entrepreneurs then go out to recruit trust group leaders who eventually form trust groups and bring in individual farmer members to become members of the trust group. And when the trust group entrepreneur basically goes out to recruit trust group leaders, we apply a psychometric test, and our testing is basically designed to identify, like I mentioned before, farmers with strong potential get towards performance and cooperativeness. Metrics that are used to determine this are is gleaned from data that we've gotten over the years working with the farmers. The tests are digitally administered by a member of Babangona's team, a field officer, and thereafter, depending on the results that we see from the prospective farmer, then we place them in different tiers and categories. So, for example, a farmer that after the test has been administered reflects a result that shows that this farmer does have a strong potential in terms of his performance and his inclination to repay, basically allows us to increase the credit limits that we'd be able to provide to this farmer. And then farmers with lower performances, as the case may be, would definitely fall out of the program or have less credits granted to them, as the case may be. Next slide, please. And so over the years, based on the data that we've been able to glean from our members, we constantly use this data to improve the tests that we administer. And the tests basically work around 2 things. Firstly, it's designed to improve Babangona's risk assessment. Currently, we've built an AI-powered tool, which we consistently update with new data that we get from the farmers, and consistently learning based on the performance that we see from farmers at the end of the season, from the time of recruitment, and to see how they perform in terms of the outcome. And then we currently use this matrix to improve our selection process. And also during the course of the year, we run surveys amongst our farmers, and the surveys are also designed to identify what is important to the farmer per time, helping us to get a better understanding of what our farmers need and where their minds really are at every point in time. And this helps us to always fine-tune our services and understand how we can better improve retention in our farmers. And the impact of all this effort in terms of collating and processing data has been truly remarkable over the years. In terms of credit default, we have very, very low credit default rates. I think as of 2019 was somewhere around 99% repayment rates. And also, it has also helped to improve our farmer retention rates because one of the things that always, one of the highest cost factors for us as a business is in recruiting new farmers each season. And so by selecting the right category of farmers over time, we're able to improve our retention rates. And thirdly, which is also very important, by selecting the right class of farmers, we're able to identify farmers who would benefit the most from the training and the services that we provide for them. As a social enterprise, one of the key things that is important to us is the scale of impact that we have on these farmers. And so being able to recruit correctly and train and support is a very critical component of everything that we do. Next slide, please. In terms of training and development, one of the things that we've been able to achieve over the years is to understand what really piques the interest of the farmers that we work with. And so in trying to communicate with the farmers, we understand that, the farmer might have vast experience, long experience doing certain things in a particular way. Doesn't necessarily mean that that turns out to be the best or the most productive way, to get results. And so we've been able to understand better how to communicate with our farmers and develop training and our training materials and products that we give to the farmers have evolved to help us pass on this message more accurately to the farmers. We observed over time that farmers do prefer, or it's easier to communicate with them when you understand sort of like the barriers in terms of communication and literacy. And so over time, the sort of materials that we produce to improve the learning experience for our farmers is really hampers on a lot of descriptive imagery and simplifying the process, and also a lot of repetition. Over time, we found that these tend to be more impactful when trying to pass on messages to the farmers that we work with.
Well, can you wrap it up?
Yes, please. And so finally, talking about some of the challenges that we've experienced, looking at in terms of recruitment, identifying farmers within communities, and communication barriers and cultural barriers in these communities, and also in terms of training. Likewise, we talk about communication barriers there and basically retaining farmer interest. And I think these are some of the key areas that we as an organization have had challenges, and where we would require support from organizations like IDH to improve our service delivery in this particular areas. I think that'll be all for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ubong. I think it's really interesting that we hear from a very different sector where the crops mature very quickly. But you're also looking into farmer loyalty, you're into building trust, you're into relationships, which is not that different when you think about the story that Annelle told us. So let's jump to IDH. Let's hear what Jay can tell us from his experience and what IDH as a development organization is working on. Jay, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Peter already nicely set the stage. He explained a lot about what are the benefits and then why also have to engage, companies has to engage closely with farmers. So I will not take time in there, but really will focus on IDH Farmfit experience, working with several different agri-businesses and then service providers. What we have seen over the years is the process. So my presentation mainly contains about like how farmers are selected, recruited, and then also keep on continuously monitored and engaged throughout the life cycle of produce to sell, and then also to the next cycle. That is the idea. So here in the slide, you can see the process laid out for you, and then we can go through step by step on each of this. So first thing, yes, you already know that like it is mainly depending on procurement location, right? So when there is a decision of where to procure, you will look at like the climatic conditions, soil type, whether it can be grown or not, but also like it is about access to that location, and then who else is present there buying from the same farmers. These are all the factors that you already know, but we can jump more into the farmer traits, because there is a discussion also we had with the other speakers. So you might know historically it is more about the physical characteristics, but recently we are also looking at the behavioral characteristics of motivation of the farmer, and then also I mean like it is the sales data that the farmers who supplied to over the years, their performance, and then other kind of data. So what we observed in our experience is like there is also archetypes in selecting farmers, right? One is there is no selection, and then another one is farmer-led. Wubong explained to us Babangona model of having a lead farmer, and then they make referrals, or like you have extension officers, they make referrals, and then you will select those farmers. Another one is procurement led, which is where you see the historical data, who are the best farmers that are supplying to you, and then will keep on selecting similar kind of farmers, or the same farmers growing more. And then recently what is evolving, and then there is a need for it, is a data-led model. So rest of the things are also data, but what we are really talking about is predictive data models here, where if you want to establish a new supply chain, you don't have a already historical record with the farmer. This is where the most cost is, where you can look at some kind of data points here, and then select farmers based on the data. So what we advise is like in any of these models, including actively including data is always a very, very good option. It will definitely reduce cost and give also future certainty of whether one thing worked versus other thing. So I would also like to introduce to you, yes, Peter already hinted to you, IDH has developed a farmer segmentation model. Here, what we have is like we looked at different models, different data sets, and then we looked at across many value chains. And what we found out is like some set of data are more relevant in segmentation. It is like, as previous speakers mentioned, assets, attitude and behavior, income of the farmer, and access to technology. These are the major groups. And then most of the data you might be already collecting as a agribusiness and service provider, and then using the tool, FarmFit segmentation tool, and the logic, you can actually segment farmers in 9 subsegments, and then they mainly fall in 3 main segments that are already known commercially to all of you, which is subsistence farmers, commercializing farmers, and then diversifying farmers, but under which each of these has also 3 separate segments. One is with the high service readiness index, another one is medium service readiness, and another one is low service readiness. What is it meant is like we suggested certain services, and then what is the likelihood of farmer taking such services, and if it is high, then farmer is more likely to take those services. So I can spend a bit more time on the segmentation piece, but what I would do is like in couple of weeks, we would already release the segmentation tool on the brief. It is actually a tool that can be used across different value chains, but a caution note on that, segmentation is not a one-off approach. The data monitoring has to be done throughout the seasons, and learn from what you observe and move the farmers across different segments. But the IDH tool will definitely give you a good shot at initially segmenting farmers, and keep on engaging the farmers. And then once you reached out to you identified the farmers, you will conduct an outreach either through existing networks. For example, I mean, like various countries has their Ministry of agricultural departments with established programs already, and then you can leverage that network, or you can conduct your own outreach either through radio campaigns or like having model plots. And more importantly is formal versus informal contracts. In our experience, we saw that 40 to 50% of the business happens through informal or oral agreements. And then there are risks about it, and then formal agreements has their benefits, but like it is more about the long-term relationship with the farmer, right? So having a formal agreement will also give a sense of security to the farmer, and then also for the buyer, it is also long-term trust, some kind of security for the buyer as well. And then honoring these contracts will get into the business, long-term business. And to speed up, I mean, like acceptance and reject, what we have seen, whether the farmers engage with you or not also depends on comprehensive services that the agribusiness will provide, right? It is not only just buying, but also providing access to input, providing access to credit. When it comes to Babangona, they're also providing access to credit. And then many of the companies are providing input packages on credit. So thinking about like how to keep the service offering as comprehensive as possible is very important in terms of long-term sustainability and loyalty. I will not spend a lot of time on coaching because already the speakers already spend quite a lot. And then just focusing again on the data. It is about like not only having a contract, but also continuously monitoring what is happening on the field, either through, I mean, like for example, it can be bad weather conditions and the infestation that will lead to less sourcing at the end of the season. But you have to have eyes on the ground, and nowadays there is a technology, and then with the technology and the data that you are collecting, it will help already flag any kind of yearly warning system, so that you can address those risks together with the farmer. And then the final message is having the long-term engagement, and then keep the loyalty up, right? So once having formal contracts, another one is engaging with the right farmers through data, and then also having progressive service delivery package, because like when you engage with farmers with data, you know farmers better. Different farmers has at a different stage of their growth, and so the more complex farmer need more complex service package in order to engage with the company. So yeah, this is mostly it from our side. We have with what we have seen with our Farmfit engagement and the businesses. But please feel free to reach out to us in terms of any of these topics, in terms of having the service delivery model designed for your agribusiness. Over to you, Peter.
Thank you, Jay. That was really really impressive. It was short for such an enormous load of information. Very well done. Thank you. There's a few quick highlights, and then I want to go to the questions and answers to give the audience an opportunity. What I hear is that you're working on different ways to select. You talk about farmer selection, procurement, data. It's different words, but I hear the same thing when I listen to Ubong, when I listen to Anahele. It's the same sort of thinking. Okay, you put farmers in a category of high, medium, and low service readiness, which is a different categorization than what Touton uses or what Ubong uses. But again, it's putting farmers in certain groups so you can give them a tailor-made service. And what's really exciting is that IDH has a segmentation tool. As you say, it may not be the final answer, it may not be complete, this is work in motion, but it's exciting to think that we may come to a point that we have tools actually we can use, so that we don't all individually have to pioneer and try to come up with something that should be in the public arena. So that was really good news. I want to hand over now to our audience, to our listeners, and open for questions. So please go ahead.
Sahid was asking about the impact that intermediaries can have on the communities, like aggregators. So we did actually consider or took into consideration the commercial relationship we had with local buyers in the selection of the communities prior to the selection of farmers. So our experience has been mainly at the stage of selection and farmer segmentation. At the phase of engagement, I think they do also have a strong role to play. But in the context of the FDP, the effort really is coming from the household. and from the farmers. So we do need to go down to that level and being able to use specific selection criteria for the farmer and the household themselves. So I'm hoping I'm answering you this question. And there was another one about the incentives to farmers for adopting these practices that are recommended in the FDP. So the FDP is a pluriannual coaching, so diagnostic and coaching plan. So it does involve, from our side as a company, a commitment to provide the support to the farmers and the households over a number of years, and all the different practices and package of practices that are recommended, of course, have the ambition to support the increased productivity of the cocoa farm for improved income and livelihoods. So this is the main incentive for the farmers. It's a continuous support and extension from our side, and if the practices are adopted, improve productivity.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. One question, a couple of questions directed to Ubong. Kendra is asking Ubong about what is the gender breakdown of participating farmers in Babangona's program?
Okay, that's a good question. I don't have the exact numbers now, but as of the last time I checked, it was somewhere around for women, I think it was somewhere around 29%, 29%, in terms of direct farmers. However, we do have programs that we run for spouses of our male farmers, or their female wards, and those programs are targeted directly at women. So it's called our Women Empowerment Development Program, under our Last Mile Retail Program. And this year we're able to support, I think, around 23,000 women. So if you wanted to look at all the numbers together in terms of how many people, both farmers and non-farmers, that Babangona is providing some form of support to, you can see that we do have a number. So if I was to take 20,000 plus odd plus women plus 80% of 42,000, I do have we do have quite a number of women that we're supporting, even though they're not all directly in our smallholder program.
Great, Ubong. Another question that is directed to you is, they liked your presentation quite a lot and asking if you can shed more light on the curriculum. So what is the kind of curriculum?
Okay, so I mean, the curriculum basically covers, and this is focused on the value chain where we are operating. So talking about maize and rice particularly, and it does cover a bit of financial literacy. It does cover agronomic practice. It does cover post-harvest practice and things like that. And yes, that's and that's what it is broadly. I think one of the things we really try to do with the farmers is, at different levels, you apply different levels of complexity. So for someone who's a trust group entrepreneur, even though he's a farmer, you do know that based on his experience with Babangona, he's more open to learning new tools and new tricks, as compared with someone who's just coming into the program. So there's a bit of variation there, but mostly it's really around financial literacy, agronomy, and harvest and post-harvest practices.
Great. Another question to all of the panelists. We spoke a lot about data, and then data in segmenting, probably data collection, but we haven't emphasized on technology. in terms of like last mile technology that farmers can use in terms of probably, let's say, the weather information systems, or like anything that supports farmers to build skills, and then also provide market access. And then the question isn't that a missed opportunity? So any of you want to take that?
I can provide a beginning of answer. Yes, of course. I mean, data and technology can be used at different steps of our service delivery model to identify farmer, to select farmer, to disseminate information, disseminate the services, collect data at different step of the process. I do believe that there is quite a lot to think about when it comes to smart use of data that we collect from different sources, but also in terms of maintaining the engagement with the farmers, and identifying channels of extension. Yes, there is quite a mainstream way of providing extension services through field officers, agronomists, etc. There are many different platforms that can be used, and we are in an area of influencer. And I think when we talk about identifying the right farmer or the most likely farmers to adopt services, using influencers and influencing platforms is a way to. It's probably something we need to explore more.
Yeah, I would like to share also some of my experience working in Zambia. So where I work providing market access through mobile phones. So one challenge that I have seen is like a lot of training to the farmers is needed in terms of like making sure that they are correctly using the platform. That is one thing. One is training. Second is also the design of the platform or the applications that farmers are using has to be quite friendly, intuitive to them. So you have to tailor-made applications to them. But also, thirdly, another big challenge is the internet speed or the bandwidth. So it has to be quite low bandwidth product when we are talking about access to market. If you are thinking about like maybe farmer can upload a picture of how many bags he has or like what quality it is, still you have to think about already what is the bandwidth going to be, and then whether the application will be offline or online, as well as mobile phone ownership. But things are changing quite rapidly in developing countries. The mobile ownership is going keep on going high, and then there are a lot of possibilities. Many organizations working on this. There are quite a lot of advisory service providers, either through SMS or through an app, already quite a lot. And then still keep on things are emerging in the last mile digital opportunity for farmers.
Yeah, sorry, Jay, just to add, and just to add to everything you said, I think everything you said is spot on there, because these are some of the challenges that we have when you talk about trying to digitize processes on the field. Like you rightly mentioned, the infrastructure is it's a very big deal there. And just another challenge that we have is in terms of financing ownership of mobile phones, like you mentioned at the end. It's like it's going to be hard for you to engage a farmer whose literacy levels are quite low, and then also does not have the financing to buy this equipment that these tools will function on. So I think it's an evolving process, and so in our experience, yes, when we started, a lot of our farmers did not have that level of literacy, probably didn't know how to use a smartphone. But now, for the farmers that have transcended from just being regular farmer members to being trust group entrepreneurs, these are people that have repeatedly participated in training over a period of time, and they now are able to use some of our digital services in recruiting farmers and providing on-field services to the farmers within their own groups. So I guess the point is, it's a journey that has already started, and it just, there just has to be that consistent level of investment in terms of time and capital to upskill most of the smallholder farmers that we're working with.
Great, Ubong. A question, I mean, like, as you're already speaking, a question to you from the chat here. What was the main aim of conducting a psychometric test to farmers in relation to farmer selection, and how do you handle farmer with low formal education?
Okay, thank you very much. So the first part of the question is the aim of the psychometric test. Like I mentioned, the tests are designed to, like, determine very basic things and character traits and behavioral patterns, right? So what's your level of altruism as a person, as an individual? What do you define as fairness? What do you define as equitable? I mean, coming from looking at our own environment, right? You come into a community and you're doing something, people will first say, is this some government intervention program? And the likelihood is that once people begin to get a sense that, oh, it's a government thing, it's not going to be great quality, or we don't have to repay, you have to look at all those factors, and those are the real constraints out there on the field, right? And so in running and applying this test, you're just basically trying to understand, okay, what's really going on in the mind of this particular farmer. And then you're also trying to determine his level of skill as a farmer, basically asking him questions on, okay, so how do you currently plant your seeds? How wide apart do you plant them? Or when do you carry out a certain process? And all these things just help us to identify whatever skill gaps there might be or knowledge gaps. And then also on the financial literacy part of what we always try to do with our farmers is to move them from having a very subsistence mindset to a more commercial mindset. And so part of what the questions are designed to do is to understand where that farmer is currently at, particularly at the point in time when he's joining Babanguna as a program, because we expect that in 2-3 years he should be he should make like significant evolution there. And so taking all of that into consideration and understanding the gaps there in terms of literacy, during the course of my presentation, I did mention that one of the things we noticed, and we redesigned our training manuals to use a lot of descriptive imagery, right? So these are things without having to say, using strong words, you see things and then they see these pictures. And so they have that imagery in their head to say, okay, so this is one bag. If you do it this way, Babanguna is telling me that I'm going to get at least 10 bags. And so that sort of imagery is used, to emphasize whatever lessons that we're trying to pass across. Thank you.
I think we're at the end of the time we had planned. Maybe, Jay, you can show slide 35, which has your email address on it. If people have some burning questions, we can still answer them by email. And I see a few interesting points being made, questions on how, what would be the cost of all this data collection? What would we do for alternative crops like jatropha or crops that feed the local population? And there's a few more interesting questions on how deep do you need to go? How precise do you need to be with the data? So if there's more questions, please send them to us by email to Jay's email address, which is on the screen now. And we'd be very happy to answer them and get back in touch with you on that. Jay, over to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, everyone. And then, we will get back to you, in touch with you. And then also we'll share the segmentation tool with you in December. Thanks a lot for your time, everyone.
Okay, and we'll share the presentations as well. That's the question just coming in.
Indeed, yes.
Okay.
We will, yeah.
Okay. Good. Thank you very much for listening in, all of you, and for the really interesting questions. It shows us the interest is live for this work, and we hope that we can continue to share our progress on this. And let's all try out this IDH tool and see how it works and how we can contribute to make it even better. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.